Welcome back, everybody, to the Typewriter video series. This is Joe Van Cleve. We're doing kind of a late in the evening monochrome video style here. A little bit of wide angle fishiness going on, but I was perusing social media, and in particular the Antique Typewriter group on Facebook. If you guys are on Facebook, you owe it to yourself to visit the Antique Typewriters group, who have a great community of supporting each other, answering questions, being a real help to each other. And I was on there yesterday morning, and I was inspired, very much inspired, by a particular thread that was started by Josh Klein. The preface to this is, you guys know that I've done a series of videos and blog articles about how manual typewriters can influence and affect the quality of our writing, the writing experience. And sometimes it feels like I'm preaching to the choir at times, because you don't really need to convert a typewriter aficionado to the idea that they need to be writing with a typewriter, or that there's a certain benefit to typewriters, because we're all used to typewriters. We all enjoy them. But for a total novice to come out and say what he said, it was just fantastic. It really inspired me. So what Josh said in his thread starting on December 16th of 2018, he said, "So I just typed out the first thing I have ever written on a typewriter, and probably the only thing I have written since high school other than a resume. It felt great. The lack of distraction was amazing." Get that? It felt as if the machine just allowed ideas to flow through you straight from your brain to your fingertips, and then they just shot out onto the paper. Absolutely amazing. I also decided to write a letter to Tom Hanks after watching California Typewriter for the first time. He goes on to talk a little bit about that. Then he says, "Anyway, guys, I just wanted to let you know that I'm hooked. It's really something special when you get in a groove and start pecking out ideas on one of these things. So thanks to all of you." Now, isn't that great? A newcomer to typewriters, and the very first thing he talks about is how they are non-distractive, and they just kind of pull the words right out of you. That was fantastic. Now, Josh's initial experience with typing was on a Corona 4, he tells us. And he says, it was an awesome machine, and with what I think was an amazing feel. He says, I really, really liked the ease with which I was able to write on it. Now, isn't that what we've been preaching for a while here, us typewriter aficionados? That it is easy. There's 45 comments to this thread, and they're all wonderful comments. But Stephen White replies. He says, "For years, I was told journaling was the way to go for stress relief, and they were right. I couldn't stand the hand cramps and inability to read my own writing. Then I got my first typewriter, and I have been consistent for about 3 years now. I'm glad you found a way to use something to help you along. Welcome to the club." So I like paper and pencil. I love pens. You know, I'm an office supply junkie. I love fountain pens. I love mechanical pencils, especially, both of those. But I can share with Stephen's feelings here that I have sloppy handwriting, and it is uncomfortable for me to write for long periods of time because I have some arthritis starting in my hands. And I can really tell you that typewriting really is a way to go for me to do this journaling or this stream of consciousness kind of writing that I think is special to typewriters. And then the thread continues, and Jed Underwood replies to Josh Klein and says, "I have noticed the same thing about writing prose with a typewriter. The words just seem to flow." And then Josh replies to Jed, "They really do. I mean, before I knew it, I had 3 pages written." Both of these guys are just expressing how marvelous these machines are for just drawing the words out of you. And then Thor Halverson goes on to say further down in this thread, "I've written more in the last year via typewriter than I have in 6 years previous, if not more than that. And Josh replies to Thor and says, I can definitely see myself writing a lot more than ever before. Now, one of those methods of typewriting that I have discovered I really enjoy is using my little thermal electronic typewriter, that the Brother EP20 that types onto thermal paper. And since I've gotten it, I've found myself attracted to it for a lot of reasons. The small size, the lightweight, the portability, and the quietness of it. But I found myself writing a long, kind of a stream of consciousness journal article today, and it was inspired in large measure by this very thread we're talking about here. And I'm kind of sympathizing with a lot of the things that are said in this article, in this Facebook posting. I say this newcomer wrote very eloquently about the difference it made to his creative life when writing via typewriter versus by hand or computer. I write, it's this very kind of thing that I've been sensitive to since I've become a typewriter writer. With handwriting, I easily get cramps if I write too much or too fast. Typing, for me, is faster and easier than handwriting. I think that's true. It is for me, even though I love pens and pencils. And then I go on to talk about the difference between typing versus word processing. And I say they're not the same because, for me, the sheer purity of typing on a machine that does nothing else but type is a joy that few people know unless you too have sat down before one of these marvelous machines and hammered out some kind of piece, whether it be some profound prose or merely the amateur's musings, such as myself. It's the idea that words belong to all of us. There should not be some kind of privileged priesthood of the few who are vetted to be real writers while the rest of us plebes are the mere rabble. No, language, it can be argued, is the very thing that makes us human. And so we all deserve, by means of our humanness, the right to write. What better way to write than a true dedicated writing machine designed from the ground up to do nothing else but write, to put letters on paper. And that whole piece I wrote, that's just an excerpt from it, but that whole thing was inspired by this Facebook posting that was started by Josh Klein, a newcomer to typewriters. And I was so excited to read this whole thread. There was so much reinforcement in this thread about things that we've been talking about and I've been thinking about lately. You know, we make a lot of noise, and maybe rightly so, in the typewriter community about the benefits of typewriters as a means of preventing or eliminating the distractions that come from the internet. But the other side of that coin is examples such as this Facebook article are very much indicative of the power of social media as applied to certain specialist subject matter like our beloved typewriters, for instance. There is a lot of power because you're bringing together a community of people who are like-minded. They can come in and join, and then they too start to receive the benefits of the long-term members, and the long-term members start to receive the benefits of new blood, new people in the group. And so it's that two-way dialogue that makes these kinds of social interactions so much alive and meaningful. So don't dismiss the power of social media when it's applied in the right ways to the right things. I think that's a great lesson for us here. This article and my thoughts that have come out of it have me thinking really about an analogy between writing and, let's say, photography, for instance, a technical art. There are a lot of, for instance, YouTubers out there who are posting videos about photography. And there is a lot of people, amateurs, who are engaged in photography, have been since the birth of the medium itself. But with writing, it seems like you don't have as much amateur writing. I think the pure joy of writing for the sake of the joy of writing, in other words, the love of writing, which is what the word amateur means, comes from the Latin meaning love. The love of writing for the sake of writing is really what amateur writing should be. And just like in the modern culture these days, everybody that has a phone has a camera on them, and photography is ubiquitous. Just like photography is universal and ubiquitous, I think writing should be for the sake of writing, not writing to the standard of some professional publication, newspaper, magazine, journal, or academia, but writing for the sake of writing. Now, I'm inspired by the idea that if you look back on the history of popular music into the, let's say, the 1970s, there was this movement of the spoken word that became hip hop and rap music. This urban music was fueled by words. It brought the spoken word alive into music more than it had been before, and it's still alive. And many of the people who were instrumental in bringing about rap music, urban music, hip-hop music, where the words are so important, more so than the melody or the music part of it, those people a lot of them came from socioeconomic backgrounds that were the very antithesis of the professional writer, what you might think of as the 20th century professional writer, writing for the New Yorker or the New York Times or whatever. No, these people came from the streets, but they took words and empowered them by the words. They made the words their own words. They used the power of language themselves and transformed the culture. Really, music has been transformed since then because of the power of the spoken word. So we get back to this idea of typewriting as a way to inspire and fuel our creative passion just to write for the sheer joy of writing, not for this idea that I'm going to start writing because maybe I can become a professional writer or make money at it. No, I think it's a lot more important and a lot deeper than that. I think it's really about there's something fundamental and primal about humans and language. Again, as I said earlier, that's one of the things that makes us human is our language ability. And so writing is instrumental to that. It's fundamental to that. The conventional wisdom is that the word processor and the computer word processor platform displaced typewriters. But what's interesting about the typewriter revival, several things. First of all, sociologists have told us for decades that we're in a post-literary world, and we're in a visual world. And we see that more and more with even the way software is designed with visual icons instead of writing. But what's interesting is if indeed word processors have displaced typewriters, you don't see as much excitement. I certainly don't see evidence of as much excitement out there when the latest version of Microsoft Word is released. In other words, there isn't much excitement for writing in the general public as there seems to be for photography, for instance, by the masses. And you might argue that maybe texting is a form of writing, which I think it is. But you don't see any other technology fueling an interest in writing like typewriters are doing. And I think that's very fascinating. And so perhaps with the typewriter revival, we see not just the hearkening back to an older technology, but we're really seeing a resurgence of interest in writing that goes along with the mechanical nature of the machines themselves. It's almost a common sight these days, if you've attended a type-in, to see young kids and teenagers get excited about writing because of the mechanical, physical nature of typewriters. And I don't think I see that same kind of excitement about word processors. When a teenager gets a laptop computer, I think to them means just as much about the ability to interact socially and edit movies and things like that. Probably more of that than it is, oh, I have a word processor now, I get to write. But typewriters seem to induce this excitement about writing that you just don't see for more modern technology. I certainly don't see it. And I think it's interesting. I think there is a direct connection there too between typewriters and a resurgence of interest in writing. And this is part of the typewriter revival that I think isn't well documented, but I think it's going on. It's starting to happen. Well, until next time, stay creative, keep writing, and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye.